All right, well, it's time for Brisbane's Legal Lowdown with Attwood Marshall Lawyers. Buying a home is one of the biggest financial decisions most people ever make. For many home buyers, a building and pest report provides a peace of mind before moving ahead with a purchase. But what happens when you move into your new home and discover that there are some major structural defaults? Maybe there's water damage, and maybe there's some termites that have made their home in yours that were never picked up in the report. Unfortunately, it's a situation that many people find themselves in, especially in our competitive property market here in Queensland, where buyers often feel pressured to move fast. So if a building and pest report misses a serious issue, who's responsible and can buyers take action? I'm so glad that Commercial Litigation Special Counsel Jade Carlson is here from Attwood Marshall Lawyers, because this happened to us, happened to me. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Carla.
When I say that, I say it because, you know, it's pretty common for buyers to discover that there have been serious defects after settlement that weren't picked up in a building and pest report. For us, thankfully, we hadn't even entered into that process, but we felt pressured to go with the supplied building and pest that the real estate had done independently, air quotes, and we sought different advice and found that there was a major issue.
Yeah, Carla, and it's more common than what buyers may realise.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, some buyers move into what they thought was their dream home, and only to discover serious issues after settlement that can turn the dream purchase into a very costly surprise. Thankfully, you discovered this before settlement
Sure.
and were probably able to terminate your contract. But for some people, they might not discover it until later, which is very scary.
And it's not just like, you know, a report that may have been supplied by the real estate. It could have been a professional report that they had paid for as well. Does that mean they're protected at building and pest reports actually guarantees?
Yeah, well, a pest and building inspection report is valuable, but it's not a guarantee that every defect will necessarily be found.
Right.
And the reason for this is inspectors usually go and conduct a visual inspection on a particular day. There are some limitations, and unless they do an invasive inspection, they're not necessarily going to see everything. But look, as a result, some buyers discover serious issues after settlement, such as concealed water damage, structural problems, or even hidden termite activity. Sometimes this is because the defect was not necessarily detectable, but other times it may raise questions about whether the inspection was carried out properly.
Yeah, but that's my thing, right? So say there is, you know, something that's majorly missed in the report that, you know, could be termite damage or structural issue, whatever. Can you hold the building inspector responsible for not finding it, for not disclosing it, for whatever reason?
Well, look, most of the time, yes. If a major defect such as termite damage or structural issue should have been identified by what we say a reasonably competent inspector but wasn't, the buyer may have a claim against the inspector. And not to limit any claims, but that would usually be like a breach of contract or a negligence type claim. However, not every missed defect necessarily leads to liability. And the key question is whether the defect was reasonably detectable during the inspection, taking into account limitations of the report and the conditions of the property on the day.
Okay, there's a few things there. I wonder whether or not the seller, do they have any obligations to disclose if they know of a defect in a house?
Yeah, so look, that really depends on the state and territory which the contract's entered into. But generally speaking, sellers can't intentionally mislead buyers about the property's condition, okay? If a seller knows about a significant defect and makes misleading or false statements or conceals information, then the seller may face legal consequences. That said, there's no current broad obligation requiring sellers to volunteer every defect. So this is why it's so important that buyers do their due diligence, including obtaining building and pest inspection reports.
This is where my issue lies, and every state and territory is different, and I bought and sold places in different states in the country, and Queensland is a strange one for me because, you know, unless you ask the question, they're not legally obligated, right, to give you the answer or to tell you if something is wrong. But how do you know if you have to ask that question or not? To me, that's sneaky.
Yeah, look, you do have to ask the question.
As a buyer,
real estate agents can be held liable if you've asked the question and they've given you misleading information.
Sure.
But look, even though buyers are expected to make their own inquiries, it's not a free pass for sellers. Sellers and agents can't engage in that misleading and deceptive conduct. But look, as a practical matter, buyers should still assume responsibility for carrying out their due diligence.
Buyer beware.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but there's sometimes when you're buying, and in our instance, we needed to make the purchase fairly quickly. It was closing at the end of the year. It was getting to Christmas time, and we didn't ask certain questions around whether or not the property had certain defects. And then we found out the hard way when it flooded, because it's not on a flood map, right? But it's to do with this particular house and the way it was built. And then we were told after the fact by the real estate agent, oh, yeah, they put in an insurance claim back in 2022, the latest big deluge, 2022, was it 2019? I think both. And I was wondering why the downstairs was so newly renovated. And then it turns out there was an issue, there was a defect with the house that wasn't disclosed, but we didn't think to ask that question because it didn't appear on a flood map. It doesn't appear on a flood map. And we would never have known and never thought to even ask that question because it's so specific to that particular house.
Yeah, that's true. But look, building and pest reports, inspectors will come in. They will identify that there's been recent renovations.
Right.
There might not be obvious flooding issues like interior, but there might be some obvious things directly exterior that they might pick up and say, oh, this is a problem.
Yeah.
I recommend you do a more invasive inspection, and you need to look at those recommendations. So it is so important to get the pest and building report. And look, in a competitive market, it's so understandable why buyers feel pressured not to get building and pest inspection reports. You know, there's multiple contracts and you're in a situation where the agent says to you, well, if you don't ask for a building and pest, then, you'll get the contract. But, you really don't want to be buying a property and there be a significant, serious problem that's going to be extremely costly.
That seems unscrupulous to me. And I've been in that position where I felt the pressure to purchase something or at least put a deposit down or something because for exactly the way you just described it. Oh, you don't need to get it. It's okay. We've done it. And it'll put you ahead of everyone else. And that's not what you want to be doing. It's like a major purchase in one's lifetime.
No. And thankfully, you've probably bought property, so you're aware. But for first-time buyers, very scary.
It is indeed. Right now, my guest is Jade, Carlson, who is a commercial litigation special counsel. We're talking about building and pest inspections on houses. Perhaps you've found yourself in this instance as well. The text line 0499 880 882, or you can call through as well if you want some advice or feedback from Jade. The open line, thanks to Watch Smoke Alarms, is 133 882. Just very quickly, we've seen buyers waive those conditions to secure a property, like you said, in a competitive market. From a legal perspective, how risky is that?
Well, it is extremely risky. It's one of the biggest risks that buyers can take. When buyers waive conditions such as like a building and pest, they're effectively giving up important protections that allow them to investigate the property and walk away if there's serious issues. So it is a number one thing that you would do when you've put in a contract. You would make it subject to building and pest.
Yeah. I mean, that is the logical thing to do. But sometimes, you get caught up in the emotion of it and maybe you're trying to outbid someone else or, it is one of those things. Okay, if you discover, for example, a major defect shortly after settlement, what's the first thing you should do?
The first step would be to document the problem, obtain some advice. Perhaps you get another building and pest inspection person out to come and have a look at the cause and effect of the defect. It's important to gather all your relevant documents, including your contract disclosure material and building and pest reports. And from there, I would say seek legal advice as soon as possible to assess whether you may have a claim against the seller, the inspector, the real estate agent, another party, and to ensure important evidence is preserved at such an early stage.
All right, finally, the best way that buyers can protect themselves before purchasing a property, is it the whole, subject to before you settle, or is it a case of buyer beware? Is the onus, the responsibility on us?
Look, the best protection is thorough due diligence. Make the contract subject to finance. Subject to, finance you would as well, but building and pest.
Yeah.
Second, don't just obtain the reports. Once you get the building inspection report, read it carefully so you understand, as well as you understand what the limitations or exclusions might be under that building and pest report. if anything is in there that's reported is unclear, speak directly with the inspector and pay close attention to those major defects identified in and the recommendations for further investigation. Those recommendations should never be ignored, as they can be an indication of a more serious issue. And finally, take the time to engage a reputable and experienced building and pest inspector.
Yeah.
Spending a little bit more money before purchase can save you, obviously, from significant expense and stress after settlement.
So, Jade, I guess you think you're looking out for things like a license number, whether they are a builder, whether they're licensed to carry out those sorts of inspections?
Absolutely. And don't find those pest inspectors that are, charge at a very low rate and say, yes, we'll have it to you within 24 hours. You want somebody that's been around for a little while and knows what they're doing.
A bit reputable as opposed to you'll get $50 off if you quote this, if you Google search them.
Exactly.
All right. Are you the right person to go to? If I go to attwoodmarshall.com.au and I find myself in a situation where I've bought something that's not quite right, where's the first place? What's the first sort of place I would go to within Attwood Marshall?
Yes, being a commercial litigator, I deal with these disputes all the time. So jump on our website, find me, Jade Carlson, Special Counsel. There's contact details there. Give me a call and I can direct you in the right place.
Okay. All right. Good to know, because it just seems stupid. I was like, what would you Google? Pest and building lawyer. What would you do to search?
I have found a major defect after purchasing a property.
Just look up Jade Carlson. You'll find you at Attwood Marshall. Thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate your time and your expertise.